Chased by a Friend in the Park by I've Got Flowers. A few years ago, when I was still in school, I had a tendency to attract an assortment of odd people simply because I was genuine and nice to everyone I had met. This one kid, Sam, was new to the school at the time and shared a few classes with me. He was eccentric and often had difficulty completing his schoolwork, but was generally received well by everyone else. It was when I volunteered to be his partner in a food and nutrition class when I began to notice some troubling behavior from Sam. We were assigned to make a simple batch of blueberry muffins, nothing too strenuous. As I was prepping the oven, Sam casually told me how he fantasized about putting his pet puppy into his oven at home, and then promptly showed me pictures of the animal. I brushed it off and continued with the task. Over the next few weeks, Sam would send me, over school email, various images of gore, things pertaining to Adolf Hitler and Nazism, and various religious images pertaining to Allah. I wouldn't reply to these emails, nor would I acknowledge to him that I had received them. But it's also important to note that I never alerted anyone to this behavior either, as I would have felt bad for reporting him and thus getting him into trouble. I tried to ignore him and avoid him as much as possible, hoping Sam would just leave me alone. But I wasn't able to avoid him entirely, and many of our conversations were one-sided, with him rambling about mustard gas and setting small fires in his backyard. And then, one day out of the blue, he asked me in person if I would come and meet him at the local park behind an elementary school. Me being the anxious person that I am, unable to say no, I accepted his offer, and we agreed to meet up the next day after school. The next day, however, Sam was absent from school. No emails were sent to me, none of his other friends knew where he was, and I simply pushed it from my mind and carried on with my day. Well, school ended and I promptly walked into the park. It was empty as it had just recently rained and the sky was still overcast. I went to our meetup spot, which was a section of forest flanked by bamboo, which all sat next to a fairly big creek. On the adjacent side of the creek was a sprawling field of corn, with a home far in the distance, and that'll be important later. I waited for roughly 10 minutes according to my watch, and just as I was about to walk home thinking he was going to be a no-show, I heard a very distinct thwack, like something was actively hacking down the bamboo. I turned towards the sound and shouted into the bamboo, asking if it was Sam making that noise. That was when he charged at me with this huge-ass machete, screaming, "Allahu Akbar!" at the top of his lungs. His face was wrapped in a black cloth, and it wasn't long before I had noticed he wasn't alone. There was another kid with him, someone obviously younger than both of us, and I didn't know him. As soon as Sam had cleared his way through bamboo and wood, he ran right at me, wildly swinging. I got really angry and yelled for him to stop, but he wouldn't listen. He caught me across the stomach, but thankfully he only tore through my shirt and left a pink line of irritated skin. I did the only thing I knew to get away from him, knowing that if I chose to run up the hill into the elementary school, he would surely catch up. So I dove into the creek and bounded and half swam my way awkwardly to the other side. Sam tried to follow suit, but his shoes sunk into the creek mud on the bank, briefly hindering him. This was one of the last times I have ever seen him in person. I scrambled up the other side, clawed my way through the exposed tree roots, earth, and rock, and tore my way through the cornfields. I was terrified for my life at this point, being so many red flags that I had ignored, hoping he would leave me alone, and I thought I was surely going to be seriously maimed or killed by this kid at this point. I kept running until I hit a back road, and from there I ran until I found that house I mentioned previously. I banged on the door, jammed my fingers onto the doorbell, etc. And eventually, an older gentleman opened the door, and immediately I told him to call the police and that I was being chased. He ushered me in at once and promptly called the police. They searched the park and found the discarded black cloth that was wrapped around Sam's head. They found the boy he was with a little ways down the road. It was his younger brother. From there, they were able to find Sam at a friend's house, and everything else is a bit murky. Not sure what happened to Sam. All I know is that he isn't in school anymore, and everyone seems to have forgotten about him. But that fear I had felt, and It was nothing I had ever experienced before. It was so raw, but it kept me running until I found someone to help me. This whole experience has left me very shaken and wary. Lesson learned. And guys, please, don't ignore red flags. Don't ignore gut feelings like I did. God, I hope I never run into Sam again. Heading back to school, submitted by The Lonely Buck. I go to an out-of-state college in the South, but I live in Philadelphia. My junior year, this was in 2018, I was heading back to school in my dad's Cadillac Escalade. It was new and he only drove it in the summer. He had a friend near my college who was going to store it for the winter months, and I would drive it back up at the end of classes. Usually my parents came down with me in a different vehicle, but he thought this would work out and then I could just fly home for the holiday breaks. I got on the road later than I wanted to. It was about a 10-hour trip. It was mostly highways until I had to head west for a bit. But then out of nowhere, or maybe I'm an idiot and didn't check the weather, a hella storm came up. Traffic was light and I didn't want hail to damage the esky, so I pulled under a viaduct and up where there was another car waiting out the storm. It lasted a good 40 minutes, and I texted my dad to let him know what I was doing. By now it was getting late, and I knew that getting my shit into my dorm would be a pain in the ass with the main doors being locked after hours. My dad called me back and told me to get a room someplace and then start off the next day. He would call his buddy and let him know what was going on. So when the storm ended, I drove for a bit, but there was nothing out there. The next biggest town on my phone was about an hour away, and I was really whipped at this time. So I came up on a little motel with the vacancy sign on and pulled in. I don't know about you, but motels kind of creep me out. All the doors go right to the parking lot, and that's just creepy. Plus there's windows right there too, unlike a hotel room. But I didn't want to drive any further. I took a chance and got a room. It actually wasn't that bad. There was a McDonald's up the way, so I went and got some food and then settled in for whatever cable TV had to offer. I fell asleep, but at some point in the night, I thought I heard the door open. When I looked up in my groggy state, it was just pitch black in the room. When I woke up, it was to bright sunshine, and I was totally confused. I was in the passenger seat of the Escalade on some dirt road. It took me a minute to process what was going on. The keys were in the ignition, and then I scrambled for my phone and saw that it was 2 p.m. the next day. I called my dad in a panic, and he said to call 911 and try to find out where I was. I could hear my mom screaming in the background and did as he asked. I looked at my phone before I called 911, and I was about 5 miles from the motel. I gave the dispatcher a general description of where I was, and then whoever it was on the other end of the line told me to stay put and someone would be out. I was going out of my mind. It was about an hour later that a car pulled up and a cop got out and asked me for ID. And that's when I realized I didn't have my wallet. I explained my situation, and he nodded, and he said that he and I should check the rest of the vehicle. Almost everything was there that I had brought, except for my laptop and my Les Paul. I had to fill out a report, and the cop asked the motel owner who else was staying there the night before, but I was the only person that had a room. I was sure I locked that door. That's when I noticed a soreness in my arm, and there was a red bump on it. The cop looked at it and said he thought it was a needle mark, and maybe that I should get medical attention. By now I was feeling better, and I wanted to just get to school, so I passed on his offer. But, to make a long story short, someone likely broke into my room, drugged me in my sleep, and stole some of my stuff, and then left me on that country road. I got to school, had to get a new ID, cancel all my credit cards and all that hassle. About a week later, my dad called and told me the scariest part of the story. He received a piece of mail for me. It was one piece of paper folded around my driver's license, and written on it in what my dad said looked like little kids' writing was the sentence, "You got off easy. I was in a good mood." Of course I reported that to the police, but nothing ever came of it. I still get chills thinking about that. Senior year? Going home that year and going back on my senior year, I drove straight through with a detour around that town and motel. Surfs Down, submitted by What's Up, Brah. I've been surfing for about 5 years after a late start in my age. I'd gotten aboard when I was 15. Most of the guys I surfed with had been doing it since they were 8 or 9. It was cool as they were the locals and my friends, and they were very tolerant of me being a noob. There was one older guy that this story surrounds who really helped me out a ton, and I'll call him Jace. As I slowly got better, he taught me a lot, especially about staying calm in fucked up situations. Sadly, he passed away a few years after I was now a local myself, and not relegated to the shorter runs closer to the beach. The story I want to share happened when I was on a work assignment in Costa Rica. It was for a month of writing, but I was stoked to take my board and spend my free time checking out spots I'd only read about in magazines. My girlfriend was going to come down for my last week, and we were going to stay another just on vacation. It was in my second week there that I got an invite from a local to check out Playa Avellanas. I accepted his invitation on the spot over an Imperial, and he said he'd pick me up the next day. Playa isn't intense, but it has its harsh stuff and its chill side as well. I'd already surfed Witch's Rock, which was rad, but I'd never surfed a reef break before, so I was excited and apprehensive. On the way there, my friend kept telling me not to worry about it. After a few runs, I was going to sell everything I owned and move down to Costa Rica to surf. We got there around mid-tide, and I was surprised there weren't a lot of other people out. Waves were breaking left to right, which was killer for me, a goofy footer. There were maybe 10 other people out, and I stuck close to my buddies, so they knew I was okay. After a few crush runs, one of the guys said something I didn't understand, and my friend said to avoid a spot where one of them said there was a decent rip. I remember thinking, so what? A good rip makes for good waves, so let's just keep killing it. Stupid move, and here's where shit goes down. Blowing off that local advice, I hit a wave and it was a good one, providing a long run. But as I carved, I did realize it was getting near the spot he was talking about. For a second my mind twitched, but the next thing I knew, I was down. Oh well, there'll be more runs. But in the aftermath of the swell, I got caught in that rip. It really wasn't that bad, and I knew I could follow it out and swim up. But suddenly my leash snagged against a giant piece of coral, and my entire body stopped with a jerk. Everything I had been taught, surfing, swimming, staying cool, ran right out of my head. I could hear the other waves going over my head and the pounding sound they make. My heart pounding too, and in my panic, I started to tug at my leash instead of taking other action. My lungs were burning, my head was swimming literally, and I started to think this was it, I was fucked. I was going to drown over a stupid rip in a piece of coral. It felt like I was going to black out. When I looked to my side, I swear on my mother's grave, I saw my old teacher Jace, who just said, "Stop, follow the flow," and pointed to the beach. Despite running out of air and my lungs on fire, a calm came over me and I stopped panicking. I let my body go limp, and the rip turned, and the next thing I knew, I was floating upward. I hit the surface gasping for air, and by now my buddy saw my head pop up. He paddled over through the next 2 swells and grabbed my dumb ass and pulled me to the beach. I lay there coughing up water and trying to get a grip of where I was, and when I finally sat up, I asked him where my friend Jace was, the guy who chilled me out. He just looked at me and said in broken English, "Brother, we only ones out here now." I looked around, and there was no one else in the water. It was just him and me. I don't care what anyone says or thinks, but I truly believe my teacher Jace came back in some form to make sure I was safe, and to remind me of the lessons he gave me. Had I not seen him there in the water, I don't know where I'd be today. Anyway, at the end of the day, I learned another lesson, and also thought that cutting my leash would have been smarter than protecting my board. My girlfriend came down and we surfed other spots with my neighbor, but as much stoke went on, the biggest stoke was seeing my friend and saving my stupid ass. Yeah, I did get worked a couple more times while I was down there, and there was one annoying day of dick and clam draggers, but that was a trip I'll never forget. Be safe out there. I miss you, Jace. Mahalo. Guy in the Basement, submitted by Flint. When I was in high school, my friend up the street, I'll call Jason, decided to have a house party when his parents went out of town for a week around Easter. I, being an adopted child, was kind of on my own a lot as my parents got divorced about 5 years after they adopted me. I was adopted when I was 3. My dad worked a lot to provide for me and my sister, who was my adoptive parents' biological kid. She was 4 years older than me, and we kept house most of the time as my dad was forced to work swing shifts, first shifts, and third shifts at his job. My dad was and is one of the most loving people you could ever meet. He's extremely smart, he's extremely dedicated to his family, is very good at what he does in life, and is in extremely fit shape. So, on this particular Saturday, my dad was working overtime on third shift because it meant double time, and he was saving up to take me and my sister on a trip to Disney that summer. I know I haven't mentioned my adoptive mom a lot, but she really didn't have much interaction in our lives after the divorce. We saw her like once a month, and even then it was strained. I don't think she ever really wanted kids, and I don't hold that against her. She wasn't a bitch or anything. I just think she was in a different spot in her life when she decided to split up from my dad. So Jason called me that Saturday morning and said that his older brother was going to arrange to get us a beer ball so we could have a house party. We weren't going to invite a lot of people, just some close friends, and just have a night of drinking games and movies. There's always a lot of stories out there about crazy parties and things getting out of control, but that's not what happened here at all. It was only about 15 or 16 people, mostly boyfriends and girlfriends. We all just sat around playing drinking games and listening to music and just hanging out. It was a lot of fun. Around 11:30, there was a knock at the door, and this guy was standing there. He looked to be in his mid-20s, and he asked for Jason's older brother. Jason's older brother was not there. He was off doing his own thing. The guy asked to come in, and Jason let him in and got him a beer. I thought it was a little odd that a guy that old wanted to hang out with a bunch of 16 and 17-year-olds, but whatever, it wasn't my house. The night wore on and people started to leave, so Jason and I immediately started cleaning up in our drunken stupor. I mean, cleaning up in the best way possible, just throwing everything into trash bags to be taken out the next day. And that's when I asked Jason, what happened to that older guy? And he said, yeah, I didn't see him leave, and he kind of just disappeared. We didn't think anything more about it and crashed in the living room and just kept talking about how much of a fun party it was. That's when we heard a noise coming from the basement. We thought maybe it was one of our friends and his girlfriend down there fooling around, so we went down to check. There was no one in the rec room and no one in the laundry room. We figured maybe we just heard a funny noise and went back upstairs. We decided to have another beer, and that's when we heard the noise again, but this time followed by footsteps running up the basement stairs and going out the side door. We jumped up and looked outside, but didn't see anyone. So we again went downstairs, and that's when Jason noticed some autographed jerseys and football helmets that his dad had in a display case were no longer there. Jason looked at me and just said, "Oh shit, I am a dead man." We immediately panicked and ran outside to see if we could see anyone who might have been out there that maybe had taken the items, but as we looked up and down the street, it was empty. Jason was on the edge of tears, knowing that his father was going to kill him when he found out that the things had been stolen, and that he had thrown a party, and I tried my best to chill him out as we sat back down in the living room. That's when we heard the side door open quietly, and soft footsteps going back into the basement. Mind you, we heard this because it was a lull in our talking. We crept back downstairs as fast and as quietly as we could, and looked around again, but couldn't find anyone. We decided to fake it and go back upstairs, knowing that someone had to have been down there and was probably coming back for more memorabilia. We assumed that the person who was stealing thought we would pass out from our beer, so when we got to the top of the stairs, I looked at Jason and whispered, let's go back down there and sleep. If someone's down there like we think, there's no way he can get past us. We can jump him. It's 2-on-1. And that's what we did. I sat on a couch, Jason sat in a chair, and we decided to run the night out and catch whoever this was. Stupid plan by stupid kids. We eventually fell asleep, and around 6:30 a.m. we both woke up to footsteps coming down the stairs. Jason and I sat up, and the next thing I knew, I was looking into the face of my dad. My sister had told him that I had come over here, and the look on his face was not the best face I'd ever seen on him. I knew I was in deep shit. Trying to divert the subject, I brought up the subject of the stolen items, and my dad, who was also friends with Jason's dad, looked over at the empty spaces on the display cabinet. He shook his head and looked at us in a very angry way, and that's when we heard a noise in the closet, just off the laundry room. We hadn't checked there. My dad looked at us and told us to stay where we were, and my dad yelled out to whoever is in there, "Get your ass out here right now!" There was silence and then another thump from the closet. My dad yelled again, and the door burst open, and the guy who we had seen the night before came running out with an open bottle of bleach and a box cutter. He started to run at my dad and threw some of the bleach towards his face. My dad ducked, and as the guy got closer, he tried to hit him with the box cutter. My dad dropped to the ground and did this spin kick that hit the guy in both ankles and dropped him right on his back and ass and cranked his head onto the floor. My dad then jumped up on top of him and hit him twice, once between his eyes and once on the side of his neck, and the guy was completely out. My dad looked at Jason and told him to go upstairs and call the police, and he did. I was just staring at my dad and said, "How did you do that?" He looked at me for a minute and had a huge smile on his face before he frowned at me, again letting me know that I was not off the hook. All he said was, "Squirt, there's a lot about me that you don't know. In good time, I'll tell you." The police came and took the guy away, but not after a lot of yelling at us about parties, underage drinking, and allowing strangers to come into the house. Not long after the police left, Jason's older brother came home from wherever he had been, and my dad read him the riot act as well. The good thing is, the cops found all of the items stashed in a canvas bag in the front bushes. The guy was coming back to steal more, and Jason's brother said he sort of knew who the guy was, but was not friends with him, and had no idea how he knew we were having a party. Jason asked my dad if he was going to tell his parents, and my dad said, "Oh yeah, you better believe it. Now that the police have been here, you morons haven't given me much of a choice to let you slide." Dad marched me home and grounded me for a month. During that time, he told me a lot about his background. I never knew that he had been special forces overseas, and during that time, he learned some very intense forms of self-defense. I can't say exactly what they were, because he described it as a mixture of a number of different forms of martial arts. After the wrath of Jason's parents died down and we were both grounded, my dad had a long talk with Jason's dad and began an extremely rigorous training program with us that we were to do on our own and when my dad could be with us to lead us. It involved not just martial arts, but all kinds of housework, kind of like Karate Kid stuff, but for real. In the end, while this story isn't all that scary, I suppose looking back to me it is. Some whacked-out 20-year-old guy could have done any number of things to us while we slept, and then he tried to attack my dad. The bright side of all of it is we learned a lesson to never allow people we didn't know into our homes, and we also learned a lot about martial arts and discipline. I still practice to this day, but I'm more into jiu-jitsu now than anything else, and I'm working with my teenage son the same way my dad worked with me. My dad is still alive and watches us work together, and he's very, very proud. I hope I made him proud. It doesn't take a story like this to let everybody know out there, don't have stupid parties when you're in your high school years, or your college years for that matter. All you're doing is asking for trouble. Yeah, sure, some of those parties in college can be fun, but trouble is right around the corner at any moment. Everything sounds like a whole lot of fun, but things can go south pretty fast. Jason and I learned that lesson really quick that night. That's for sure. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you have a true scary story of any nature that you would like to hear narrated here, please email unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. And of course, it's that time of the year, looking for your Halloween stories. I always love putting together Halloween extravaganzas, and this year is no exception. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. Hit the notification button, and follow me on social media. Hey, you can even leave a comment. All that stuff is down below. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.